May 18th, 2023. It's a day many in South Park will never forget. Saturday marks 1 year since one of the worst fires in Charlotte history trapped and then killed 2 construction workers. The 5-alarm fire burned for what felt like days and claimed the lives of DeMonte Sherrill and Reuben Holmes. Thank you for joining us. I'm Nick Sturdivant. I'll be speaking with WCNC Charlotte investigative reporter Nate Morbo in just a moment. He spoke with the deputy chief of Charlotte Fire about this devastating day and the internal review of how the department is handling this fire. But first, let's take a look back at some of our reporting from the last year.
We're breaking into regular programming to bring you this breaking news. If you are in the South Park area, you have seen this massive plume of smoke and fire.
You can see the fire is really burning. I mean, driving in from this location, you can see it from miles and miles away.
Breaking right now at 4, a massive fire in South Park, torching a construction site just blocks away from South Park Mall and leaving some unaccounted for at this hour.
The family actually tells me that he called them during this blaze, pleading for someone to rescue him.
I was on the phone with him when he was in that building and it was burning down. And he was screaming for help.
Throughout the day yesterday, firefighters were warning folks here in the South Park area about inhaling the smoke from this fire because it was so thick and so dark that at points it was even picked up on our radar. You can even see here that even after the fire was put out, there were thick clouds of gray smoke still coming from that site, literally for hours into the afternoon. We know the first calls came in around 9 a.m. yesterday. Just 10 minutes later, a second alarm called in. The response kept growing till just before 10 a.m. when that 5th alarm fire was called. This is the highest response from Charlotte Fire Department, also the most dangerous.
For the past 5 years, WCNC Charlotte has covered the dangers posed by apartment buildings under construction, especially those built mainly of wood.
It's a combustible material, so as everyone knows, wood burns. You put it in the fireplace, it burns, and it burns well. That's why we use it in fireplaces. So yeah, it spreads very easily and quickly.
The fire department has discovered the would-be apartment violated 2 fire codes before flames broke out.
We also learned that the builder did not have a pre-fire plan in place, so the fire marshal had not performed an inspection.
In the days following the South Park fire,
I think they did a fantastic job.
Chief Johnson acted as the spokesperson.
Firefighters were actively rescuing 15 people.
But we can verify he did not take command of the scene that day.
Months after the deadly South Park fire that killed 2 construction workers, 3 construction companies are being faced with fines.
I don't know that it solves a ton of questions yet. I think as I glanced over it, I look and see there's some things that are pretty serious that are cited that needed to be fixed. But this is also not the holistic picture that we're trying to understand what happened.
The families of 2 construction workers killed in last year's 5-alarm fire in South Park are seeking $50 million in damages. Attorneys today saying this is to set a precedent for the need for stringent compliance with safety regulations in the construction industry.
And as promised, Nate Morbo joins us now. Thank you for joining us. It's hard to believe that it's been a year since this fire.
You know, I remember being in the newsroom that day, and usually when you hear the scanner, we all kind of jump when we hear something that's especially concerning. And I remember, it feels just like yesterday, hearing how that fire was growing, and then the reports we were getting of smoke and fire, that I was getting some videos coming in to me of the fire. And I think the big thing that everyone wants to make sure of early on is you honor the lives of those who died. But another way you honor them is to make sure this never happens again. And that's kind of been a big focus for us in recent weeks, trying to figure out, okay, it's been a year. What has changed? What still needs to change? Just trying to make sense of how do we move forward so this never happens again.
Speaking of that, Charlotte Fire's internal review, where does that stand now?
So we knew after the fire that Charlotte Fire Department was going to be doing some kind of an internal review onto this, an internal kind of investigation. The Fire Association wanted an external review. They wanted a third party to come in to take a close look, just not to place blame, but to understand, well, what can we do better next time? And Charlotte Fire said they routinely do reviews after every fire, but then we found public records that show they were going to do a deep dive. This was going to be a different review. And last summer, a committee was set up to try to start studying this, to figure out, well, what can we do moving forward? What are the best practices? So over the last, I don't know, half a year, I've been asking routinely to Charlotte Fire, checking in, well, what's the status of this review? What's happening? And it's still going on. There's no report yet. It's still ongoing. And you start to wonder, well, what's taking so long, right? And you're trying to figure out, the years past, what has actually been put in place. And so those conversations continue, and we finally get to the point where we told Charlotte Fire, like, can you tell us, lay out for us while you're waiting for this report, what actually has changed, what you've improved? And we finally got that information, and we actually were able to get an interview with the deputy chief earlier in the week, after initially they wouldn't talk on camera in person with us. We asked for an interview more than 2 weeks ago. They had no interest in doing that, and we said, well, we're going to talk to the fire chief at a city council meeting if you don't. And then we showed up to headquarters that night, and eventually the deputy chief came out and talked with us. And something we learned is not only they're doing an internal review, there's an external review happening as well. There's a federal agency that's studying this as well, trying to kind of figure out from the communication sides of things, from dispatching, what can be learned from that day too, to come up with an after-action report. And the deputy chief also told me they're waiting on one final report until their internal review is done. So it feels like they're getting closer. You know, they wouldn't say there would be any additional changes moving forward because they have to wait for the report, but it feels like finally, a year later, we may be getting a better idea of what worked, what didn't work that day, what can be better next time.
Are you surprised that it's taking this long for, I mean, again, we're still waiting for this review. We're talking about a year.
You know, I try to, number one, put myself in the shoes of the families, and I think a year seems too long, right? But then I think that this is government. Yeah. And bureaucracy obviously holds up things quite a bit with red tape. So I don't know, I felt like it would have been completed a little bit sooner. I mean, I was asking last summer, expecting it to already have been completed by then. So it's hard to say, but I know that the families, and talking to their attorneys, they desperately want to make sure this never happens again to someone else.
Before we hear from the deputy chief, I do want to ask you, does Charlotte Fire believe they could have saved more lives, or more lives could have been saved?
So I asked the deputy chief, and I think you're going to hear it in a second, did something fall through the cracks in this situation? And there's a reluctance to say yes, right? We know they didn't inspect the site. They kind of placed the blame on a communication failure from the builder and contractor. But they are supposed to inspect the site. Yeah. So it's kind of up to you to decide if you feel like they could have saved more lives. You know, in fairness to them, the two men who died were trapped. There was no real way to get to them at that point. And more firefighters potentially could have died if, you know, firefighters could have died, right? And they were already had to be rescued, the firefighters, because they had to give a mayday call. So it's hard to say, but you know, there's a thought from the state fire marshal that had some things been in place back then, there's a better chance that these two men would have survived.
And Nate, as you mentioned, you've constantly been reaching out to Charlotte Fire, and finally, earlier this week, you got a chance to hear from the deputy chief. Listen into what he had to say.
From the city's perspective, is there anywhere where you all feel like something fell through the cracks from the fire department's perspective?
No, not from the fire department's perspective, and that's one of the things that we've looked at is continually, hey, how can we get better? How can we meet the construction managers so that we can get ahead of the game earlier? And we're doing that. That's some of the improvements that you've seen. That's where we get in early with everybody.
Not even the no inspection. You don't feel like that fell through the cracks?
So again, everything we're doing right now as we look back on that is to just see how we could get better and how we could touch base, not only in that incident, but every incident moving forward. We're constantly trying to figure out how we can meet their needs and, you know, balance that safety along with maintaining their productivity.
I do want to ask, again, you've been reaching out to them. Can you break down, for the sake of transparency, how many times you reached out to the point where you had to physically show up and say, hey, talk to me?
Yeah, I mean, well, let me just start by saying this. Like, this is one of the worst fires in our community's history, and they've not done an interview with us in a long time about this, and I requested several weeks ago. Now, granted, there was a deadly officer shooting here that took up a lot of people's resources for many days, but we felt fair in the amount of time that we gave them, And it ended up being almost 3 weeks, kind of getting close to 3 weeks for an interview. And from our perspective, we're not a newspaper, right? We're a TV station. And so you can email me something, but I'm not going to just print that because we're a TV station. And I honestly feel like the public deserves to hear from these public officials, to hold them accountable so they can be the ones telling the public what we can do better, what we should have done, what we could have done, what we're trying to do, what we've changed, how we're going to keep you safe moving forward. That's their job. That's not my job. I mean, it was repeat over and over again. What's the status? Oftentimes with no response, to the point that I escalated to the City of Charlotte's communications department as well to just say, look, I don't understand why we're at this point. This seems unreasonable. We don't have to do it this way. You know, I don't want to have to shove a camera in the fire chief's face. That's not my style. I don't like doing that. I will if I have to. And we finally kind of reached an agreement. It must have been like 3:30 Monday, you know. My deadline for that interview was the close of business Monday, and they were not going to make that happen. So we had to kind of, we were put in a position where we had to do that. And I think it was a very cordial, respectful conversation. And quite honestly, I think the deputy chief did fine with it, right? I mean, it just sounds better coming from him than it does for me.
And I just wanted to add some context. I don't want people to believe that you just pop up with a camera. I mean, you went through every step of the process to try to get it.
And we told them, look, if you don't do the interview, set up the interview by close of business Monday, we will, before the city council meeting Monday, we will interview the chief.
Now, you mentioned this earlier. We had this internal review. There's another review, right?
Which we didn't know about until we met with the deputy fire chief. I mean, that's one other thing that we would have probably not realized had we met with him Monday. Yeah, there's an external review by a federal agency looking at the communications that day, just to see if there were any gaps, if there were any successes. And, you know, that's the federal government, so I don't know how long that's going to take either.
Yeah. What is Charlotte Fire doing to improve the inspection process? I feel like that's the question a lot of people are thinking.
Right, so this is the fire marshal's office within the fire department. Number one, they're getting to construction sites much sooner. They're saying before construction even begins now, we're meeting with contractors and builders. We're letting out clear expectations of the safety requirements from the start. Number two, they also have added, and they're budgeting this year, 12 more fire inspectors, which will allow them to catch up on a backlog that they've been dealing with on inspections. You know, the pandemic really set them back, they tell us. I mean, number one, businesses were closed. You can't inspect a closed business. And also, I mean, you saw the city, cranes were up everywhere. They were still building in the meantime. So they've said they've been able to kind of slowly catch back up on the inspection process. They've set out clear requirements and suggestions to make sure this doesn't happen again. Because in this case, we know the builder and contractor failed to meet a couple safety codes, but had the fire marshal's office inspected, they would have flagged that sooner potentially and said, we need to fix this now. You know, so that these workers would have a clear way to get out of the building. You know, they'd have a rescue plan in place. They would know what to do in a worst case scenario like this.
I guess, you know, from our day-to-day reporting, I mean, there are not only fires in Charlotte, but there are fires nationally. What is being done on a federal level?
So I think it was the day after this fire, number one, we found a report from 2022 that said construction fires had increased substantially over the last decade. I think 4,300 in a year. That's like 12 a day.
Wow.
And you think about construction material, it's easily combustible. It's wood, so it'll catch flames quickly, and they're also being built so quickly. And so the National Fire Protection Association has set up some guidelines that they really want communities and states to adopt. And the State Fire Marshal's Office did that. They kind of took the construction portion and ahead of schedule changed some things because they really feel like this fire, unfortunately, it takes someone dying to make a change when it comes to codes enforcement. And so they adopted these new requirements that really require, in part, like a pre-fire safety plan. It has to be very specific for each site. So in the old days, it might be a boilerplate, a generic, here's our safety plan. Well, now it's very specific to the location, to what materials you're using, to the layout of the building. So that is something that was put in place. And we talked to the State Fire Marshal earlier this week about that.
Yeah, let's listen into what the State Fire Marshal had to say, along with the NFPA. Listen in.
If the codes were in place, there would have been a better chance that these men would have survived.
That is correct.
And it goes back to the reactive thing. Isn't that sad?
it is very sad. You know, we do so much work in fire prevention and community risk reduction, but to really affect change, especially in codes, it takes a loss of life. And it goes back to Hamlet in the mid-90s. You know, we started our fire code. That's when the fire code started in North Carolina, was after all the deaths in Hamlet.
Every fire loss is just tragic, right? Whether there be major property loss, and even more tragic when there's a fatality. One of the ways that we can honor those folks is to ensure that chance of that happening in the future is lessened. We're trying to learn lessons from all of this and implement the best practices so that it doesn't happen again. Fire losses are tragic. They are happening all over the world. Through the best consensus codes and standards in place, we can reduce the chances of a fire happening. And if one does happen, we can reduce the chances that it is a large loss or even a fatal fire.
Now let's recap. We talked about the internal review. We talked about the inspection process. Let's talk about the families. How are they doing? They filed a lawsuit recently. Where are they with this lawsuit, and have you had a chance to talk to the families?
Yeah, I mean, they're claiming wrongful death, and they believe there was negligence on the part of several of the contractors involved. They did not cite the city in their lawsuit, but that lawsuit is pending. I did spend a couple weeks talking with the attorneys, the people that represent those families. And initially we thought that they were going to talk with us, but eventually we're told, and you can totally understand this, this time of year is very difficult for them right now. You know, the 1 year anniversary, it's hard for them to think that they can make it through an interview right now. And I totally understand that. One of the families is in New York. The other one is here in Charlotte. And so we know that they want people to learn from this. We know that this is not an easy time of year for them. We have two men that they believe should have never died in the first place, that really their deaths were preventable.
Let's talk about the site where the fire happened. What's next for this site?
We visited the site. They're rebuilding.
Yeah.
If you go out there, I mean, the construction workers are out there. They're building. It's fairly tall, once again. And you see clear signs when you go there about exits for the fire department, for them to enter and exit. You see a standpipe, which is a water source that goes into big buildings you can connect a hose to and help fight a fire. That's there now. That wasn't there before, according to the Charlotte Fire Department. So noticeable changes when you go in. And, you know, I believe the builder previously told us when they were going to rebuild that they take safety seriously. And, you know, this has been, I think, a wake-up call for not only our community, but for the nation. And I'll leave you with this, too. As big of a deal this is for us, the National Fire Protection Association told us these kind of fires, deadly fires, are happening all the time. And imagine how many big fires are claiming people's lives in other cities just like Charlotte.
Wow. Nate Morbo, thank you, as I always say, doing the work for the people here in the area. And thank you for joining us for this in-depth look. When we finally get these internal reviews, we'll be sure to share it with you online and on air. The best way to know and stay in the know is to download the WCNC Charlotte mobile app and turn on push notifications.